Okay, we're going to take a look at a folk-like melody or a common practice period style melody and look at trying to figure out a harmonic progression that would be suitable for this particular melody. So let's go ahead and look at the melody first. We can see that we're in 3/4 time and that we are in 1 flat, which means we're either in F major or D minor. As I look through the melody, I don't see any accidentals. It starts on an F at the beginning, ends on an F at the end. So in all likelihood, this piece is in the key of F major. So let's go ahead and take a listen to it and start to make some decisions about how we might harmonize this. So the melody sounds something like this. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Nice sounding folk type melody, common practice period style melody. So the first thing I want to do is kind of determine about how frequently I hear the chords moving. If there were an accompaniment that were to go along with this melody, about how long would I hear each chord lasting? So as I look through the melody, what I like to do is kind of decide, when do I hear the chords changing? And as I just kind of get a general sense of how often I hear the chords changing, it sounds as if the chords might be accompanied by a chord changing every measure, like chord, 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 like that. About 1 chord per measure. When I get towards the end, the last 2 measures over here, right over here, it seems as though we might get a chord, and then another chord here, and then another chord here, in order to get some kind of a cadence. So we might put a bracket here on the first 3 notes, and then a bracket for the single leading tone there, and then back up to the F. So we might have a slightly faster harmonic rhythm right at the end. So my brackets in general, what I believe the harmonic rhythm would be, is a chord pretty much for each measure. So it's going to look something like this. Now I don't know what those chords are yet, but I pretty much think that the chords are changing about this frequently. Now I'm in the key of F, so what I want to do first is go through and either put the letter names of the chords that I think might be happening at each bracket, or a possible Roman numeral. And I want to maybe give myself 1 or at least 2 options, maybe, because I want to be able to make some decisions at the end. So let's go ahead and look at that first measure. Okay, so that measure, what we're looking for is a predominance of harmonic tones. So if we have an arpeggiation of a chord, if it seems to strongly outline the root in the 5th or the root in the 3rd of a chord, if there seems to be an absence of non-harmonic tones like passing tones, things like that, I want to try to make an educated guess what the best possible harmony would be. So in this first measure, assuming I'm in the key of F, I see that the notes are FAC. So I'm going to go ahead and do Roman numerals here. FAC, that strongly makes a 1 chord, right? Now, if I were to try to give some other option, what other option might work for that chord? Well, I've got an F and an A, so that might be a DFA. We could have a 6 chord maybe. And we've got an A and a C, and that would make an ACE. So maybe that would be a 3 chord. Well, let's go ahead and just say a possible option might be the 6 chord, the DFA. Now, it's probably not that. We've got a very strong FAC there, but at least it's an option. Let's go to the next measure, B flat, C, and D. Now that does not make a chord. But we have a very strong B flat and a D on there. So I can make some assumptions about what the chord might be. So I have the possibility of it being a BDF or a B flat DF. That would be a 4 chord. But I also have the possibility of it being a GBD, which would be a 2 chord in the key. So those are a couple of pretty strong options. And it looks like that C is probably going to be some kind of a non-harmonic tone. The next measure, well, if I look at the notes on the beats, I have E and C and B flat. Well, E and C, that would make a very strong 5 chord, right? A CEG, so that's a pretty good possibility. E and C might also be a part of an ACE, which would, in the key of F, that would be a 3 chord. So maybe that's a possibility, right? And the B flat, we can sort of look at that as being a passing tone. The next measure, we've got A, D, C. Well, we don't have any chord that's got an A, a D, and a C in it. But on the beats, we've got A and C, A and C. So this could possibly be the notes of an ACE, which might be a 3 chord. but we could also possibly have an FAC, right? FAC, and that would, in the key of F, be a 1 chord. And it looks like we're going to have that D, probably in all likelihood, being a non-harmonic tone, like an escape tone, or actually in this case an appoggiatura. The next measure starts very much like the beginning of the melody. It's just instead of being an FAC, it's a DFA. So that very strongly outlines a DFA, which in the key of F would be a 6 chord. But if I had to give it one other Roman numeral, D and F both belong to a BDF, that could be a 4 chord, and F and A also belong to a 1 chord, FAC. So you just choose one or use both. So I'm going to go ahead and say that there's a possibility that this could be a 4 chord in this measure. The next measure, looks somewhat similar to the second measure. G and B flat are happening strongly on the beats. So if we just took that as the root in the third, that would be a GBD. So potentially we've got a 2 chord there. But G and B flat also exist on an EGB in the key of F, which would be a leading tone chord, 7 diminished. Looks like that A is going to be some kind of a non-harmonic tone. Now finally we decided on 2 chords in this next measure because that leading tone seems to imply some kind of a cadence. And if I just look at those notes, A, C, and F, that arpeggiates an F major chord. So that's a strong implication that we've got a tonic chord there, a 1 chord. If we needed another choice, well, the strong notes appear to be A and C, might be a 3 chord. The A and the F together might make it a DFA, maybe it's a 6 chord. You just kind of pick an option, maybe a 6 chord, maybe a DFA. That leading tone, remember, if you got the last 2 notes going 7 to 1, that strongly implies an authentic cadence at the end. But if I had to give it another choice, maybe a leading tone chord in the second to last or penultimate note, and maybe an F could belong to a DFA or it could belong to a BDF. So who knows? Maybe we could end on a 6 chord there. So those are some possibilities of the harmonic progression that could exist. Now what we're going to do is go through and do a combination of things. Look for the chords that have the most harmonic tones, and also look for a series of chords that give us the most circle progression, or a preponderance of 1s, 4s, and 5s, which are always going to be pretty strong. So we start to circle what our best option might be. It looks like that first measure pretty strongly implies a 1 chord. Now, going from the 1 chord to the next chord, we could go from a 1 to 2, and that would probably sound okay. But 1 to 4 is actually circle progression, so if we're looking for the strongest root movement, it would probably go from a 1 to a 4. If we're looking for the next chord, then, we have the E and the C, right? And that pretty strongly implies a 5 chord. In fact, if we kind of look at where things are going, we see we're probably going to end up going to a 1 chord next. 4 to 5 isn't necessarily the strongest root movement. It's an ascending second, but neither is 4 to 3. That's a descending second. So probably going from a 4 to a 5 chord is going to be our strongest harmonic progression at this point. If we had decided to come from a 2 chord, then 2 to 5 would have been very strong. That would have been a circle progression. It looks like the next one, probably going from a 5 chord to a 1 chord, makes a very strong authentic cadence there, and that's probably our best option. Now the next measure, although 1 to 4 is very strong circle progression, the chords themselves, or the notes themselves, seem to imply a very strong 6 chord. So probably, although it's not the strongest root movement from a 1 to a 6, the 6 is the strongly implied chord based on the melody notes, so we're probably going to choose a 6 chord there. The next measure has a G and a B flat. And if we're looking at circle progression, 6 to 2 makes a very strong circle progression. Okay, so we could go from a 6 to a 7. In fact, we might listen to what some of that sounds like, but probably the circle progression of 6 to 2 is the strongest root movement. So next we've got remember that outlined ACF is very, very strong. It's all the notes of the chord are outlined there. So probably our next chord is going to be a 1 chord. Now 2 to 6 is a pretty strong root movement. That's actually a reverse circle progression. That might sound pretty good too. But the reason I chose the 1 is that the 3 notes outline the tonic chord, and so that's probably the strongest. And it looks as though our last 2 chords of 5 to 1 are probably going to be our strongest root movement. So if I just play through these chords and play the string of circles that I've got, which seem to say what our decision were the strongest chords, it's going to sound something like this. Okay, so that sounds like a very practical and solid chord progression for this particular melody. Now, again, we could have chosen some of the other ones. Maybe that 2 chord in the second measure, that might have sounded pretty good going to that 5. What does that sound like? Sounds like this. That sounded pretty good too. So that would have been a good option. And remember, this is just one possible option of a harmonization of this folk melody. I happened to choose a harmonic rhythm, which was basically 1 chord per measure. You might have chosen one that had a faster harmonic rhythm, or possibly even a slower harmonic rhythm. But this just seemed to be the harmonic rhythm and the chords that were implied the most strongly by this particular melody.